In this video, we're going to be covering what is commonly referred to as developer tools. Now, every major web browser, this includes Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari on Mac, Opera, all of the major web browsers, they all provide web developer tools, or tools that are built into the browser in order to help web developers build the most efficient, effective, and resource-sensitive websites they can. Now, we're going to focus specifically on Chrome today, and if you would like to follow along, go ahead and open up your browser, open up Neumont's website, so neumont.edu, and once you've got the website loaded and everything looks like it's ready to go, we don't see a spinner up here, meaning that the whole page is loaded. The way that you open Chrome Developer Tools is in the right-hand corner up here, you will see these three little dots. When you click on that, you can come down into this menu and click on More Tools. Now, under More Tools, you'll see there is a Developer Tools option right here. There's also a shortcut. On Mac, it has a shortcut, and on Windows, it's a little different. But you can remember that. If you remember that shortcut, that'll really help you when you're opening up developer tools as you are doing development. Right now, we're going to go ahead and just click on developer tools. Now, sometimes you will find that the developer tools will open up on the right-hand side of your screen, or it may open up down here on the bottom. That's easily adjustable right here. If you click on the three dots on the right-hand side, you can specify what side of the document or the window that you want the tools to show up on, and you can rearrange the amount of screen real estate that it takes up just by dragging all of the panels or panes around. So right here, let's go ahead and keep it on the right-hand side, and let's walk through the tools that the Chrome Developer Tools provides a web developer. Right here, let's start off with the first one. If you look up here, you'll see at the top navigation pane of the developer tools, you'll see a bunch of tabs. We're going to go over the primary tabs in a little bit of detail, and then we'll talk about the features of some of these more advanced tabs, but we won't really get into how to use them. We'll leave those as an exercise for you to figure out on your own. So let's start off with the Elements tab. On the Elements tab, what it allows you to do is it allows you to explore the HTML that a page is composed of, or the structure of the page. If we remember when we learned about HTML, the structure of the page is exposed right here in an actual element tree that we can expand and contract based on what we want to look at. If we're looking for any kind of script or CSS or anything that's pulled in, we can look in the head and make sure that scripts get pulled in. Or if actual scripts that are embedded in the page, we can look at them as well. If we want to look at the structure of the page, we can go ahead and open up the body and locate all of the tags within this page. If we see right here, we've got div, which is the primary container of the page. One thing you'll notice that is really cool about the developer tools is that as you work through the hierarchy of elements, you will find that you can also see the particular element that you are highlighting on the right-hand side. You'll see it highlighted on the left-hand side in the actual HTML. So you'll be able to see where that element lives on the page and how it is nested inside of other elements. You'll get to see that page nesting right there, which is a really cool feature of these developer tools. Another great part of the Elements tab is the fact that you will get to see the CSS, or the styling, the look and feel of a page, and how it is applied to the HTML that you're looking at. So right here, we've got the HTML, or the styles, the styles that are being applied to the HTML right here. And if I want to see the styling for a particular element, instead of trying to find that element in the HTML hierarchy tree that we've got above, you can click on this nice little box with an arrow, and it allows you to actually walk through the visual HTML and find the element you're looking for and try to see the styling that is behind it. Now you'll see that some of the styling is actually exposed to you in a little bit of an overlay drop down, so you actually don't have to go search through the full CSS if you just want a brief overview of the CSS and the styling that's impacting that element. If you want to look at the full CSS, you can select the element. You'll see that it selects it in the HTML tree, and then it gives you down here every single style that has been applied to that particular element through the CSS cascading hierarchy. Now remember, CSS is cascading, meaning that any styles that are applied to it as the page gets loaded and as it reads through the CSS, it gets applied in a hierarchy, and as you get deeper into that hierarchy, the styles override the styles that were applied to it previously. And the cool thing about this is that the DevTools actually shows you when a particular style is overridden by a style that happens further down the cascading tree. This is really important when you're trying to debug CSS issues or when you can't get a page element to look exactly the way you want it to. The usual culprit in this is the styling is being overridden in a style further down the tree, and you're looking at one that's further up the tree, and you can't figure out where the style is being overridden. So make sure that you check this out if you're ever trying to debug the positioning of an element in your HTML or the styling of an element in your HTML. Really good for CSS debugging and structure debugging and positioning debugging in your web pages when things aren't turning out exactly the way you wanted them to. Now the console. So up here, go back to the navigation at the top, we'll see the console. Console is extremely important. If we reload the page, so Control R or Command R on a Mac, and we set this to default. So right here, I just switched to defaults. Now what this does is the console is extremely important because the console gives you a look into what is happening as the page is loaded by the browser. Now as the browser loads the page, it's going to go through and build the HTML or build the actual page DOM, so the document object model, from the HTML that you wrote. And as it's building it, if it runs into issues with your HTML, you are going to see that as an error or a warning or an info notice inside of the console. It also, as it's executing your JavaScript, as it gets pulled in and loaded in the page, it's also going to catch any errors that are thrown by the JavaScript interpreter as it's executing the JavaScript on your page. The console is probably going to be next to the Elements tab, one of your most useful pages or tabs or tools inside of the developer tools. In that, it is going to provide you a lot of information on errors and problems in your HTML and your JavaScript as well as your CSS as it is getting loaded in the browser. And here you can see on our page, we've got a problem with a call to inner HTML in JavaScript. And unfortunately, when inner HTML is being called on whatever it was trying to locate inside of the page, it couldn't find that element. So that element was null or non-existent. Now the way to check this out is to go ahead and click on index, and you'll see that it takes you to the source tab, takes you to the index.html page, and then takes you right to the JavaScript that is causing the error right here. This is super useful when you're trying to debug the JavaScript that you're writing. If you are running into errors in the console, it's because something is wrong in your JavaScript or your HTML. And in this case, this countdown counter, which is what it looks like it is not being found by JavaScript because that element must have been removed from the page. We'll have to send that to IT and have them look at that and figure out why we've got that error. So let's head back to the console. So with this, you can click on any of these items over here, any of these links, and it'll take you to whatever is causing the warning or the error. Now, usually I'm just interested in the warning and errors, so if I go ahead and take off the info and verbose and we just leave errors and warnings, this is where I like to have it set, because then I can see any errors that are happening, which are critical. You definitely want to get those fixed. And also any warnings, things that might be becoming deprecated in JavaScript or HTML or CSS. And the browser is going to warn you that those things might become deprecated. In other words, no longer used in a future version of the languages. And you'll want to get those fixed as soon as possible too. They're not as critical as errors, of course, but you'll want to address all errors and warnings in your HTML and CSS and JavaScript as you are developing. So that gives us the console. Another important part of the console is that not only does it let you see what's happening in the browser as the page loads and as JavaScript gets executed, it also lets you do some tests and execute against the JavaScript in the page. So for an example, I'm just going to do a little console.log, and then this is executing in the browser. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. We got the same error right here because JavaScript got rerun and it's trying to find that awesome element again. Now, let's see, it's trying to do a counter every second. You can see that it's ticking up every second, 18, 19, 20. And so you can see that there's definitely an error in there that's probably causing our page to load slowly. But here, I went ahead and executed some JavaScript here manually in the console. Now, you'll see this undefined. Now, a lot of people don't realize why, as a result of executing some JavaScript in the browser, they get undefined. And that is because a lot of people don't realize that in JavaScript, at the end of a function call, if your function doesn't return something, JavaScript automatically returns undefined for you. In other words, this right here is a method. The .log is a method on the console object, which knows how to print to the console. And once it's done, it doesn't return a value at the end of that method call, so you get an undefined back. So let's look at one that does return something. And let's just say 5 plus 6. You'll see that it went ahead and executed 5 plus 6 with the arithmetic operator plus, and that gives us an 11 as the return result of this function call. So the plus operator is a function call on the 5 and the 6, which gives us an 11 back. So really interesting. This means that when you have JavaScript running in your browser that you've written yourself and you're wondering if something is working or not, maybe you got some errors or something, you can come in here, select one of your custom objects. So my custom object, this doesn't really exist, I'm just giving you an example. My custom object dot do something, and then I can pass it some information, and then when I execute that, I'll be able to actually see the results of my custom object and my custom method and make sure that it's actually doing what I think it's going to be doing. But as you can see, like I said, the my custom object does not exist. It was not defined. I was just giving you a little example right here. So we did see sources a little bit earlier. When we clicked on the error here, it immediately took us to sources, took us to the source code, and then took us to the location in the code where the error is happening, which we see right here is the inner HTML when we are looking for the countdown object using the document.getElementById function that's built into JavaScript to locate DOM elements. What's cool about sources is, number one, it works really well with the console to get to issues in our source code, but it also shows us where all of the resources being pulled into this web page originate. We can see that everything that makes up Neumont.edu is coming from Neumont.edu, so the web server at Neumont that is pushing out this web content. And we can see that we are also pulling in stuff from Google, Facebook, from a file server or a file server. And then Facebook again, more stuff from Google, probably Google AdWords and some of that stuff to see who's coming to the website. So this sources is extremely important when you're trying to figure out if files that you think are being pulled into your website from a third party or from a remote server, you want to make sure that those things are actually being pulled in. So if you're getting errors in the console and you can't figure them out and you think they're related to a JavaScript file that you think is being pulled into your website, you'll want to come check the sources and make sure you can actually find that particular that particular JavaScript file or CSS file, and make sure that it's actually being pulled in by checking the contents. So you can click on the actual files, it'll pull up the source code that's getting pulled in or the CSS that's getting pulled in, and you can check to make sure that those files are actually getting pulled in. And if you don't see the file that you think is being pulled in here, then you know it's a file path issue, or it's the server that is supposed to be being served from isn't serving it up. Another way to check that is the Network tab. On the Network tab, you'll get to see all requests for resources that the web page is making as it gets loaded in the browser. And you can go see the actual HTTP requests that were made for that resource, and you can see whether those requests were successful or not using the Network tab. This is extremely helpful where if in the resources you do see one listed, but the contents is empty, or if you don't see one in here, you can come over here and look for that same one and see if an HTTP request was ever made. And if it was made, if it succeeded, did you get a 200, HTTP 200 success code back? Or did you get like a 404 file not found error when that request went out? And that'll tell you that number one, if it's in here, or if it's in here and you've got a 404 not found, you've got an issue. The file doesn't exist, it's not being served by the server, or your file path is incorrect. And that'll help you fix some of those common issues that web developers have when it comes to loading resources in their HTML page. Some of the more advanced features, this Performance tab. The Performance tab itself is used to record when a page is loaded. You can actually click the record over here and then begin using the page. So you click record, you begin walking through the web page, and what the browser will do is it will record everything that's going on in the browser as you interact with the page. It'll record the execution of JavaScript, the reloading of elements, the loading of new content into the page through AJAX requests. And then when you finish recording, it will go through and analyze all of those HTTP requests, all of the files that were pulled, all of the content that was inserted in the page, and it will provide you a timeline, so a little bit of history on how that page reacted. In other words, what resources did it use? How much memory did it use? How long did it take for the requests to happen? And it'll kind of give you a good idea as to how performant your page is. It'll also help you identify any resources that are being loaded into your page that are taking a really long time to load, and then you can try to figure out why they're taking a long time to load, or if they're coming from a third party, maybe find an alternative that loads a lot faster. That way a third party's resources are not impacting how fast your page loads and therefore impacting the user's experience. So this is a really good tool for trying to figure out what's causing your page to be slow and improving the user experience for your users as they use your application, your website, or your page. Memory is very similar. Memory allows you to go ahead and take a snapshot of the memory that is being allocated and used by your web page. And it really is useful if you're trying to identify memory leaks. So if you have JavaScript executing and for some reason you have a JavaScript function, maybe a recursive function, and it never comes to an end and it's just continually cycling and it's doing it super fast and it's just bloating the memory usage in Chrome and slowing your web page really, really down, then this is the place to come find that. It allows you to identify where your JavaScript or your code might be over consuming memory, or you might have some functions that are never ending and they are just really racking up the memory until your page crashes. It also allows you to find memory bloat, so that's where you might have stuff going on in the page where you didn't expect it to consume that much memory, and then you can address those or that memory bloat by making a function more efficient or effective or finding a new way to do something. The other thing it does is it allows you to identify if your JavaScript is causing excessive garbage collection. Now, garbage collection is a more advanced topic, but garbage collection is where the interpreter for a language goes through, tries to figure out if objects that you've been using in your code are still being used, and if they're not, it tries to clean them up by destroying them. And you may have times where your JavaScript is not optimized or hasn't been written effectively or efficiently, and garbage collection is happening a ton, and garbage collection, if it's happening a lot or frequently, it's going to cause your page to slow down a lot. The next tab is Application. In here, it'll let you see a lot of important things that have to do with a JavaScript application running in the browser. Some of the key ones to look at is local storage. Local storage can be used by a web page in order to store settings and information locally on your browser. Traditionally, cookies have been used, and you'll see the warnings on web pages for cookies all the time. Cookies are a traditional way of storing like session IDs for a user so that when you make a request back to the server can easily identify who you are. But the modern browsers also provide additional options other than a cookie that allow you to store more data and store it locally so that when people come back to your website or your web page, some of the local settings that you don't want to store on the server can be stored on their local machine until they clear their cache. That's local storage, session storage. You can actually come in here and look at what's being set by the website on your website, on your browser. You can also look at an index database, web SQL, and like we said, cookies. You can look at the cache storage and the application cache. These are advanced topics that you'll probably get into later on in your education or career. For now, just know that the application section is really good if you want to find out what a website is actually storing on your machine. Security, also a really good tab. It identifies which resources pulled into the web page are from secure origins, so HTTPS or HTTP over a secure socket. That means it's encrypted. And so anything that's being pulled over HTTPS is totally clean and trusted, and you know it's coming directly from the source and unmodified by anybody in between the source and you. It also identifies anything that's coming from a unsecure or just a traditional regular HTTPS. In today's modern web, with all the security concerns, with all the identity theft, you want to make sure that every single resource being loaded in your page and from other third parties is coming in over HTTPS. That way your website is secure and clean and users can trust you and feel safe. The last tab is Audits. Audits is really good. It's kind of that last thing you want to do before you deploy a website, and that is because this one helps you fix common problems that affect a website's performance. It also analyzes your website to find out if it is accessible for people who have disabilities, and then also checks for common issues that affect user experience. So this is a good one to run when you think you're pretty close to done, or to run it periodically as you are working through development so that you can address issues with performance, accessibility, and user experience as you are building the website. So those are the main tools used within the Chrome development tools. These tools you should be using a lot as you develop.